So yesterday night, I was at a chassid of my granddaughter. So I got home this morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, like sometimes Rebbe Shechasanis. So it's somewhat of an effort to be here by 9:30, but Baruch Hashem. We should only share B'Seides Tovos. So in this week's parsha, one of the many mitzvahs is the mitzvah of Chatzaitzes, the mitzvah of trumpets. Why do Jews need trumpets? 3 reasons that we find in Chumash. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe Elohim arasei lechu shtei chatzotzos kesef mikshu ta'asa oisam v'oher lechu lemikru eido u'lamasa es hamachanois v'taku behem v'noyedu alechu kol oedu al Pesach oyel moed. The trumpets were used as a means to call the people together because they didn't use WhatsApp nor email. The Rabbonim at the time didn't give a hechsher to use that stuff, or messages, or anything else. So they used the trumpets to call the people together. And to let the people know that it's time to move on. In the Midbar, in the Membeis Mesuas, they had 42 stops and stations along the way. And then another reason, in a time of war, and finally, the third function of the Chatzaitzes was so the first reason is not relevant throughout the ages, and it is what we define as a mitzvah l'shah v'lo l'deiros. It was only relevant as long as the Eden were in the desert, wandering in the desert, until they got to Eretz Yisrael. And then the first reason they made these chatzaitzes was no longer relevant. But the other 2 are for the ages, and not only mitzvah l'shah. One, obviously, is only b'shosha beis hamikdash hoyakayim, or v'yom simchaschem u'v'moyadechem al oiloisechem v'al zivcha shalmechem. And that was when they brought the korbanos tzibur. And seems to be a machlokes Rambam and other Rishonim. Is it only uvayom simchaschem uvamoyadechem uvarosh chadshechem, or any time, every day, when they brought the korbanos tzibur? And another halacha that we learn in Chazal is it is not only chisivoyom archovo ha'atzechem in times of war, but in times of tragedy, in times of stress, in times of tzara, every shas tzara. So the Rambam, in the beginning of Hilchos Taniyos, the Rambam writes, "Mitzvah seim in a Torah lizoik ulaharia b'chatzotzos al kol tzara shetovei al tzibur." So the Rambam clearly writes in Hilchos Taniyos, it is whenever there's a tzoros rabim, tzara shebo al tzibur, we have the mitzvah of chatzotzos. And the Rambam goes over this halacha again in the very same perek. Source number 2, umedivrei sofer meleis anos al kol tzora shetovei al tzibur ad shiur chamu min hashamayim uveimei atani yisrael zoyaken betfilos ubetachniyot umariyan bechatzotzos bilvad. And that's a machlokes rishonim. The Baal HaMor in Masechet Rosh Hashanah Davov Medapei Arif. Who's the Baal HaMor? Who was he? Was he a chosid or a misnagid? He wrote 2 svarim, Amor HaGodel and Amor HaKotan. The ref? Yeah. I didn't ask where he is. I asked who he was. What was his name? Rabbeinu Zerachia Halevi. And who was his big adversary? The Ramban. What's the name of the Ramban Sefer? Melchames Hashem. So the Baal HaMor says, this is a mistake. B'shas Taniyos, we blow shofars and not chatzaitzes. Chatzaitzes is only in the time of war, and most of the shoinim side with the Rabbeinu Zerachia Halevi. But the Rambam says chatzaitzes. why don't we use chatzotzes today? So we aren't still, to our terrible dismay, we're still in the midst of a war. And a few months ago, a person came to me with two beautiful chatzotzes shel kesef. Now, the chatzotzes obviously weren't like modern trumpets, and they were just similar to a shofar in a way. They didn't have any, I don't even know how we call these things that you press with your fingers. Buttons? That's the way they're called. No more fancy word than buttons. So he brought two beautiful chatzotzes, and he asked would I write a letter of recommendation for his chatzotzes. I was impressed, but I did not write a letter. So today by the Shiur, we will understand why I didn't promote those chatzotzes. Many things, like blowing chatzotzes or trumpets today, I wouldn't come out against, because I don't think there's any downside. But we don't adopt a minig unless it is firmly based in the Messiah and in our early sources. So why don't we use chatzotzes today? B'shas tzora. The Magen Avraham asked this question, and that's source number 3. Kosav Rambam. Mitzvah say min haTorah lizik v'larei b'chatzotzes al kol tzora shelo yitavoy. Shene'emar roisem b'chatzotzes u'medivrei sefer Nisanim u'meruyim b'chatzotzes bilvad b'gvulin. Why does he write bilvad? Because in the days of Beis Hamikdash, in Rosh Hashanah, there was a combination shofars together with chatzotzes, and that's why the Rambam writes, "B'yamei Taniyos, we don't combine the two. It is only chatzotzes." Because of Magen Mishnah, "Hamuchva kedivrei Rashba, o shofar o chatzotzes, v'ani tamea, lamo ein anu noyagim letkoya be'eis tzora." Why don't we do this mitzvah? Because nobody disagrees with this halacha in the Gemara. So why don't we blow chatzotzes? And in the Achronim there are different reasonings. Source number 4 is the Pri Megadim. B'tzibur tzorachin im kol be'asora mikra tzibur Hashem dafka b'yetz Yisrael k'mo shekosa b'yartzachem v'chas v'schonim sheyesh tzar al harav azu mitzasei ma she'en ken kol echad ki yechidim damyen u'mishemocha ein toiken hayom. So the Pri Megadim suggests a reason why this is not our minig, as the Magen Avraham says, and he writes 2 reasonings. Number 1, maybe it's only in Eretz Yisrael. Number 2, how do we define a tzibur? Is it every 10 people? Or maybe it is only on the majority? Kishiyesh tzor al haroiv, azo mitzvah say, ma she'en ken kol echad ki yechidim damyen. So according to both Chidushim of the Magen Avraham, one could argue today, what's happening today, we should use those trumpets. Because our tzara today is in Eretz Yisrael, and it's not only one congregation, one kehillah, it is Klal Yisrael. And I don't think when the Pri Megadim writes Roiv, you need to count scientifically, is it Roiv? What he means is Klal Yisrael. And today, roughly 50% of Jews in the world live in Israel. And how do you define Jews today? This is a very loose definition. But Jews are in danger. There's a rise in anti-Semitism in the entire world. So one could say that Klal Yisrael is Bitzora. We all are Bitzora. And Al Kol Tzora Shel Tovah is Lav Dafka when life is in danger. So definitely one could say today the majority of Klal Yisrael is Bitzora, and we are in Eretz Yisrael. So according to the Pri Megadim, the question of the Magen Avraham would still be relevant. Why shouldn't we? Moirach Tzia is a Yankov Emden, and in this short paragraph he writes 3 different reasons why we don't use chatzotzes in our time. Nereli poshet she'einem mitzvah ala b'yetz Yisrael levad. Like the pasuk says, ki tzavoy malchama b'yartzachem. However, I just say a comment. If it would only be malchama, there would be logic to say maybe only in Eretz Yisrael. because all the wars we know through the ages weren't against Israel. They weren't against the Jews. War between nations, which endanger Jewish people as well. But war against the Jews is only in Etzesor. But if Chazal teach us, and that's in the Rambam, al kol tzora sheloi tovoi, why would there be a difference whether it says tzora chutzlaretz if it's other types of tzoras? So in the days of the Holocaust, or the Spanish Inquisition, or the Ukrainian pogroms that killed hundreds of thousands of Jews, and many times it was directed exclusively against Jews, why would there be a difference whether it says tzora chutzlaretz? Dealing with war, there would be a difference. But if Chazal teach us lav dafka malchama, it's hard to understand why would there be a difference between Etzesor and Chutzlaretz. Gam ena mitzvah lebekoyanim ubechatzitzes v'uika leke koyanim yuchosim. So I don't know whether we ever discussed the concept of two different levels of kedushas kahuna, koyanim yuchosim and koyanim chazaka. In days of yore, when we were closer to Aaron HaKohen, we knew who are the real Koyanim, who are the Koyanim Yuchosim. But after thousands of years, all the Koyanim in our day and age are Koyan Chazaka. Nobody could really prove his Kohuna going back thousands of years. And there might be a difference in the halachas between Koyanim Yuchosim and Koyanim Chazaka. 500 years ago, the Marashram and the Marshal both argued that all the Koyanim in our day and age, and this goes back 500 years, are actually a suffix, but we rely on a Chazaka. And therefore, we do Pidyon Ben, we do Nesias Kapayim Berchas Koyanim. So Rabbi Yankov suggests maybe we need Koyanei Miyuchosim to blow the Chatzotzos. V'uidna leke Koyanim Miyuchosim v'lo Chatzotzos shel Torah. Why would we need Koyanim Miyuchosim for this mitzvah more than Pidyon Ben and Berchas Koyanim? I think the Svara is the other way around. In Berchas Koyanim and Pidyon Ben we make a bracha. Suffik brachas lahokal. If we have any suffik, we wouldn't be making a bracha. By the Chatzotzos, we do not find that there was a bracha. Maybe because by Chatzotzos it is B'nei Aharon HaKoyanim. But do you remember the pasuk that we read just last week, Parshas Nosoi, regarding Berchas Koyanim? What's the lashon of the pasuk here? There, Daber el Aharon ve'el Bonov. Why would that be different than Uvnei Aharon HaKoyanim? So I don't really understand the Bianca Vemden. Why would this mitzvah necessitate Koyanim Yachosim, and it wouldn't be enough to have Koyanim Muchzokim? If Koyanim Muchzokim do Nesias Kapayim, and they make a bracha, why not to do Chatzotzos? And the third argument is, we don't have Chatzotzos. We could make them. What do you mean we don't have? We have shofros, we have lulovim, we have esrogim. Why wouldn't we have chatzotzos? So the Maram Shik says, we don't know exactly what they are. But if there would be a kpeda, what they need to be, then the description of this chatzotzos should be somewhere. It's a mitzvah d'dairis. And if there is a certain form or a certain surah, how would we know how to make those chatzotzos? Especially Chazal say that the chatzotzos of Moshe were nignas. And there are others. So we need to know how to make them. It's not in the Gemara, it's not in Rambam, it's nowhere. Doesn't this prove that there is no special form? Trumpets. As I said, trumpets without buttons. Somewhat similar to the shofars. But the shofars are organic material from animals. And the chatzotzos, the Torah says, muksha, za, kesef. So obviously, there is no special form. So all the three reasonings of the Moedik are somewhat interesting. The Netziv has a very revolutionary approach in a Sefer on Sefri. Hanere nochoin, de chatzoitzos einoi noyeg elo lefnei Hashem, כדכסב והרויסם החצויסס ונזכרתם לפני השם אלוקיכם והוא מחן האורן שהולך במלחום עם ישראל. So the Netziv says the chatzoises were only used when there was an oren. And in the days of yore, Aron Bris Hashem used to go out when Jews waged war. The oren used to pave the way for the soldiers. And that is v'nizkartem l'fnei Hashem Elokeichem. And the Netziv argues that even Bizman Bayis Sheni, Bechor Mabayis, when the Jews fought the Romans, they did not use chatzotzes because on Bayis Sheni there was no oren. And this once again is a gewaldige chiddush. Because l'fnei Hashem Elokeichem in other sources in Torah doesn't necessarily mean when there's an oren. Does anybody remember anywhere else, Lefnei Hashem Elokeichem, a mitzvah that is Lefnei Hashem Elokeichem? Lulav. Usamachtem Lefnei Hashem Elokeichem. What do we learn from that pasuk? Lulav kol shiva was noyeg only b'mikdash. But on Bayis Sheni as well, doesn't depend on the Oroin. So why would we assume that Lefnei Hashem Elokeichem is only when there's an Oroin? Brings us to the next source, Aruch HaShulchan. Neder ani esdati da'atroa lo yehave ben ha'Torah rak b'zman habayis. He doesn't go to the extreme only bayis rishon when there's an Oroin, but he does say b'zman beis hamikdash. ונזכרתם לפני השם אלוהיכם. Do you see any difference between ושמחתם לפני השם אלוהיכם and ונזכרתם לפני השם אלוהיכם? You see any difference? Is it the same? ושמחתם is, you need to be happy לפני השם אלוהיכם. That means where you're happy, that needs to be Lefnei Hashem Elokeichem, and that is only in the Mikdash. But v'nizkartem Lefnei Hashem Elokeichem, maybe that is up there in the heavens by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, by the Kisei HaKavod. So it wouldn't be exactly like v'samachtem Lefnei Hashem Elokeichem. However, the Aruch HaShulchan wasn't aware that he was mechavan to the Sefer HaChinuch. Sefer HaChinuch, source number 8, v'nohegis mitzvah zu b'zman habayis, b'koyanim shaleim ha-mitzvah l'tkoya b'chatzotzos. So the Sefer HaChinuch already writes that this mitzvah is relevant only b'zman beis hamikdash, b'zman shebeis hamikdash hoyu kayim, and that is another reason why b'zman hazeh we don't have the mitzvah of chatzotzos. Ramban in Melchemes Hashem. והטעם שלא ילמדו אסרו בחצוצרות אלא במקדש, ובמלחמה שכל ישראל תלויים בדבר. מה טעם דחצוצרות בכנופיה דכל ישראל כסיבה? הוא בעלמא לא. אלא מדרבה רחמון על הצער רצחם גמרינן לכל צער וצער שלא יתובע על הציבור, ובמעבר משופר כאין ראשונה. So the Ramban says, Al kol tzora v'tzora is shofar, not chetzotzes. Chetzotzes is only in times of war, l'kol Yisrael. In Amakim the Peda nago b'shofars. So the Ramban indicates it is only in times of war, shekol Yisrael tliyum b'davar. So according to the Ramban once again, this war in Eretz Yisrael, we would use chatzotzes. But then a man says, lav dafke chatzotzes, either chatzotzes or shofars. The Ritva is very interesting. The Ritva follows the footsteps of the Razah, the Balamon, the Ramban, Shofars, not chatzotzos. But he quotes the Rambam. The Rambam says, Al kol tzora shalei tovoi, b'shas taniyos, we blow trumpets, and not the shofars. And he writes, Ulefi svorazu, line number 4, which is underlined. Ulefi svorazu nagu b'tzorfat shelo letkoel ha'olam b'tanas sibur, kiven she'ein lanu chatzotzos. That goes back to the Moirek Tzio. We don't have chatzotzos shel Torah. So obviously the Ritva does hold. We don't know what those chatzotzos are and how to make them. So the Ritva would maintain there is a certain form or shape to the chatzotzos which we are not aware of. Even though, as I said before, it's a mitzvah l'doros. And if there is a certain shape or form, then it needs to be taught. So why doesn't the Rambam write? And nowhere in the Gemara do we deal, besides the posuk that we have, which is miksha and kesef. We don't have the form of these chatzotzos. So that is the Ritva. The Igros Moshe, Reb Moshe Feinstein, once again comes up with a big chiddush. B'ma she'ein noegim letkoya b'tanas sibur, based on a Chodesh Cheshvan Tovshin Yud Gimel. The Shiur was written 71 years ago. And Reb Moshe argues that the chatzotzos had two functions. B'yom simchaschem u'v'moyadechem u'v'roshei kodshechem. And the other one is kisavoyim al-chom al-atzachem. In both areas, the Messiahs of Chazal is more inclusive than what we find in the Posuk. B'yom simchaschem u'v'moyadechem u'v'roshei kodshechem is not only in Yom Tovim and Rosh Chodesh, but actually all the Korban Tzibur every day. And war is lav dafka war, also called tzora shalei tovoi. But Reb Moshe says both functions need to be the same chatzotzos. And it is only the chatzotzos shebemigdosh, which we blow on the karbonos, that we use b'shas tzora or b'shas melchama. Why would that be? So the Rambam includes both functions in one mitzvahs asay. Mitzvahs asay nun tes. Sefer HaMitzvahs, the Rambam brings the mitzvah of chatzotzos, and he includes in the very same mitzvah to blow these trumpets when you're makar of karbonos, and in times of war, or tragedy, or tzara. And the Maggid Mishnah wonders, why would there be one mitzvah and not two? So in the days of Beis HaMikdash, does anybody know when do we use shofar? Rosh Hashanah, and when else? Was there any other time that we had a mitzvah to blow the shofar? Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur? Yeah. Once in 50 years. Shnas HaYovel. On Yom Kippur. And the Rambam brings these two mitzvahs as two separate mitzvahs. Same shofar. Two different times and two different reasons. Why would shofar be different than chatzotzos? Why is the shofar shel Rosh Hashanah and the shofar shel Yovel two mitzvahs, and the chatzotzos of war and karbonos the same mitzvah? The Prima Godim, Tavkuf Ayin Hey, quotes the Sefer Chinuch Shin Pi Daled, and the Sefer Chinuch, as you know, or you should know, tries to explain the reasoning and the rationale of every mitzvah. So Sefer Chinuch is one of the magnificent Sifrei Mitzvahs, and he goes through the entire list of Taryag. How does he call the reasoning of the mitzvah? Who knows? Mishroshe ha-mitzvah. Rabbi, that's not the reason you're here every Friday. So the Sefer Chinuch writes, Chatzotzus is all about focus. We blow the trumpets to remind people you need to stop for a moment and think. It's a call to the people, focus, concentrate. Think about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Try to direct all your machshavas and kavanas to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that is necessarily in times of testing, of tragedy, b'shas tzara, when you need to turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and turn only to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that is also necessary when you're makrav a korban. And the korban boam lechaper, uleratzois. So the Prima Gaon writes, according to the Sefer HaChinuch, the fundamental rationale is the same whether it's b'shas HaKorbanos or in times of war. Masha Einkein, the shofar of Rosh Hashanah, the shofar of Yovel, besides the fact that you use the same tool, but they have nothing to do one with another. That is an interesting svara, but the question is, Tamei HaMitzvahs, are they relevant when we try to define Minyan HaMitzvahs? Because I quoted the Sefer HaChinuch. The Sefer HaChinuch writes in the introduction to a Sefer, are you aware that the Rambam also writes Tamei HaMitzvahs? The entire Chelek Gimel HaMoreh Nevuchim is dedicated to Tamei HaMitzvahs. The Rambam was the first advocator Tamei HaMitzvahs, and the Rashba disagreed with the Rambam. Tshuvas Rashba argues, makes no sense to try to explain Tamei HaMitzvahs. No. This is not something we are supposed to know or understand. The Rashba quotes the Medrash, V'chi ma ichpas lo l'Kadosh Baruch Hu ben shoichet ben atzav lo shoichet ben oirev. Lo nitnu ha-mitzvah zeh lo l'tzarav behemes abriyos. It's all about service. It's all about submission. We do mitzvahs because the Kadosh Baruch Hu tells us to do mitzvahs. But the Rambam argued, no, we should try to understand the rationale. And the Chinuch follows in the footsteps of the Rambam. But both the Rambam and the Chinuch stress something that to them was very important. It is not that we really know. We guess, we try to explain just for one reason, to be more passionate about our mitzvahs, to be more motivated to perform the mitzvahs, but it's not that we know. We guess, we try to explain. So would Tamei HaMitzvahs be the relevant understanding to define Minyan HaMitzvahs? That is an interesting question. If it would be up to me, I would say it all depends on the context of Toras Moshe. Aselachu shtei chatzotzos kesef, and it's the same parsha. What do you do with those chatzotzos? And therefore it's one mitzvah. The mitzvah of shofar and the mitzvah of Yovel and Rosh Hashanah are two separate parshas. So why would they be the same mitzvah? However, one of the fundamental and magnificent forms that the Ibn Ezra wrote is a sefer called Yesod Moira. And Yesod Moira, the Ibn Ezra writes a tremendous chiddush, and he writes that the reason we blow the shofar b'shas malchama is just to invoke the shofar and the korbanos. And we want the schus of the korbanos to go up to the kisei hakavod. So the shofar of Rosh Hashanah is to remind the shofar of korbanos. And according to Ibn Ezra, it makes so much sense that it's the same mitzvah. And I wrote, according to Ibn Ezra, an interesting diuk. The Torah says, ונזכרתם לפני השם אלוהיכם. וביום שמחתכם ובמועדיכם ותקעתם בחצץ, והיו לכם לזכרון. There might be a difference between היו לכם לזכרון and ונזכרתם. So the zekaron of karbonos is like a pekodon. Hayu lechem lezakoron. It's put in the safe for times of need. That's the zakoron of the karbonis. V'hayu lechem lezakoron. And when is the time of need? Ki savoy machom alatzachem v'niskartem lefnei Hashem Elokeichem. So according to the Ibn Ezra, it makes a lot of sense that it's the same mitzvah. But once again, the Ibn Ezra, even though he didn't write Sefer HaMitzvahs, but it's once again Tami HaMitzvahs, it is once again trying to explain the essence of the mitzvah of Shofar. So the Moshe Feinstein argues, they need to be the same chatzotzes. And that would give an additional reasoning, Bizman she'ein beis hamikdash kayim, and there is no tkiyan karbonos, then there is no tkiya b'shas tzora. Finally, the Seforno. Aselachu shtei chatzotzes kesef, beyoyse kavona atul and soya lachnisam liyeretz, miyad seva b'chatzotzes letruas melech. Chatzotzes are letruas melech. ואוי לכל המקרואידו, מפני שאוי המקרואידו ונשיאים על פסח ועל מוי לפני השם, רוצה שתהיה קריוסה בחצוצס, לכבוד המלך. Did you ever read in your Machzor LaRosh Hashanah the 10 reasons of Rabbeinu Saadia Gaon why we blow shofar on Rosh Hashanah? It's in every Machzor. What is the first reason Rabbeinu Saadia Gaon writes? The very first of the 10. Malchus. When we coronate a king, we blow Beikar trumpets. And the Seforno writes, that is the chatzotzes of our parsha. Kvoid Malchus. Both in Medrash Rabbah and in Medrash Tanchuma, Kodesh Baruch Hu tells Moshe, Asei lacha shtei chatzotzes kesef. By all the other Klei Mikdash, it is not Asei lacha. These were chatzotzes shel Moshe. And the Medrash says, Kodesh Baruch Hu tells Moshe, Asosicho melech, I made you a king. And there are many sources in Chazal that Moshe had a din melech. And that is Asei lacha shtei chatzotzes kesef. And the Seforno write, it's l'chod melech. Could I have a chumash with Rashi? It's actually, very briefly, in Rashi as well. And the posek Asei lacha shtei, I have Rashi here, shtei chatzotzes kesef. עשה לך שתי חצוצות כסף, עשה לך שיהיו תויקים לפונך כמלך, ויהי בשון המלך, ויעשה ספרו שים. So Rashi is בקיצור, שיהיו תויקים לפונך כמלך. Rashi, Seforno, Medrash, the chatzotzes are associated with Kvoid Malchus. And therefore, Kishayin Melech B'Yisor, there would be no mitzvah of chatzotzes. So various different reasons why we don't use chatzotzes b'shas tzora or b'shas malchama in our times. But the Rambam writes in El Chastani, "Is mitzvah lizoik ulaharia b'chatzotzos." The Magen Avraham writes, our minig is not to blow trumpets, but obviously our minig is lizoik. Lizoik el HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to cry out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in times of suffering, in times of tragedy, in times of tzara, and definitely in times of war. So the past 8 months, almost every time I speak about the fact that People are still dying every day, almost. And this war is still raging, and Klal Yisrael is still b'sakona. And every Yid in the world, especially in Eretz Yisrael, needs to feel, this is my war. It's not their war. It is the war of Eretz Yisrael. It is the war of Klal Yisrael. It is the war of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It is the war against the Rishonim that say, Lechu v'nakchidem migoy v'lo yezocher Shem Yisrael oid. These are enemies not only of Israel. They're enemies of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They're enemies of every Jew Basher Hu, as is so obvious if we look around the world today. It's not about politics. It's not about local affairs. It's al Hashem, v'al Mashiach. And what's our responsibility? To believe that our Torah and our Tefillah makes a difference. So you need to learn more and learn better and daven more and daven better and do more chesed and more schuyos. Obviously, we need more schuyos for Klal Yisrael. So we don't blow the chatzotros, but as I said, the mitzvah asay is lizoik ulaharia. So for many reasons, as we discussed today, we could explain why we don't use chatzotros in our time. But lizoik v'laharia eino ma'akvim ze ez. So even if we don't use chatzotros for any reason, we still need to cry out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and daven. So Yehi Ratzon that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should end this war, because I don't think anybody else knows where this is going. So my great Rebbe, the Klozimag Rebbe, used to say that people are accustomed to say in such a nebechdike tone, Oy, we're such a nebech, ein lanu leishon ela Avinu shebeshamayim. But he used to say, Avinu b'shamayim is not a meshenas konarotzitz. We need to cry out loud and clear. Ein lanu leishon ela Avinu shebeshamayim. And when we reach the point of recognition, she'ein lanu leishon ela Avinu shebeshamayim, Kodesh Baruch Hu doesn't forsake us. He doesn't let us down. And I think it's been quite a while since most reasonable, rational people reached that conclusion. She'ein lanu leishon ela Avinu shebeshamayim, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu won't let us down. B'siyata d'shmaya. We should see Nisim v'neflois. We are seeing Nisim v'neflois with all the tragedy and all the pain every day. If you have open eyes, you could see Yeshua Hashem, and we see miracles. So we need to double our efforts in Torah and in Tefillah and in Chesed and in Ahavas Leim and daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that we should once again be zeicha to shalom and shalva and peace and serenity be'eretz HaKodesh and in the entire world. Misha Omer Tzorosenu Dai, Misha Omer Oilamoy Dai, Yomer Tzorosenu Dai. So, I don't know whether you know what a Freudian slip means in the modern world. I said, Misha Omer Tzorosenu Dai. Misha Omer Tzorosenu Dai 1,000 times in the past, B'kol doy v'doy oimdem olenu l'chaloseinu, should once again say, Tzorosenu Dai. And we should be zoicha to rachamei shamayim and to see Pnei Moshiach Tzidkenu b'mheiro v'yomeinu Amen. Have a beautiful Shabbos.